Ladies and gentlemen, in the movie I'm going to present to you today, humanity is on the brink of a war. They have discovered a fantastic new technology, public blockchain, and they are bickering about how to use it. Some people think that it should be used to tokenize assets, and others strongly opposite. So what is wrong with public blockchain? So these people opposite. Over the past years, I've been working often with authorities, and there are recurring points that are concerns for using public blockchain and promoting it or authorizing a wider use of them for tokenizing financial assets. On the interest of tokenizing itself, I think it's settled and done. There has been many reports. Almost every authority in the world has published a report explaining that it would be fantastic to have delivery versus payment in using a DLT. But on public blockchain, there is really few voices that are interested into it. So first, let's see why is that. The first reason is authorities are experts in looking for market abuse, fraud, manipulation. They have been doing that for decades. And when they see things like MEV, it really looks like the kind of problem they have been trying to address for decades. So I've heard the fantastic presentation from Flashbot a few days ago, and I recommend seeing it. There are things being done to address it, but even some effort is not enough to totally address this concern. The second one is settlement finality. In finance, you need to know when an asset has been transferred. It's particularly critical if there is a bankruptcy to know when the asset was sent from Alice to Bob, if the asset was still in the possession of Alice or no, in the hand of Bob. So on this, same. There have been efforts to clarify these. I think it's not only a technical question, but also a question of definition, of clarifying when the transfer has happened. But there are cases that are complex. For instance, if you do a transfer on a L2, you have sent the transfer. From your point of view, you cannot revoke it, but it's not still settled on the layer one. How should we consider that? So there are questions like this that need to be clarified. The third one is governance, and actually a really big one. So I think it's a characteristic of public blockchain to have this complex governance. But we have seen also this week this discussion about Ethereum aiming to be a neutral platform. But I think neutral should not hide the nuances. There are many nuances on how a platform can reach this sort of neutrality, and many stakeholders in how the governance work between the stakers, the developers, and this needs to be clarified. Same, I think part of it could be in doing studies in governance and trying to explain how this process work, and also clarifying which blockchain have reached a level where you can have some trust in the process or not. One example is the DAO is mentioned often in authorities as a concern, like could there be a big fork and all your tokenized assets are all of a sudden duplicate in two different blockchains, and how you address that. So I think on the layer one of Ethereum, there is less concern now about that, but how it can be clear to someone on the outside, and what could happen on smaller blockchain if there is such an issue. So that's part of this problem. The fourth is scalability. Scalability is not only about the throughput and the number of transactions per second, but it's also the variability of this throughput, the fees that can increase. When you are within the ecosystem, if there is a new DeFi project that is launched, it is fine if sometimes the fees spike a little bit and you cannot do your transaction. I think it's an accepted risk. But if you're a traditional financial institution and all of a sudden the infrastructure is not working because someone is launching a degenerate NFT, doesn't make sense, right? So I think that's part of this problem. Same from this problem. I think that's problem that have been acknowledged by the community, but the answers are probably not yet satisfying for authorities. The fifth is fragmentation. Fragmentation across blockchain. You have, especially from the perspective of people that are not working in the space, blockchain is one big thing. There is the blockchain space. How can you explain that your asset is in one blockchain, another one is blocked in a bridge, and you have to wait for some time? That's difficult to perceive. So all the blockchain abstraction work is precious on this. And in the case of tokenized asset, there is another layer because And assets are even more fragmented. They don't follow the same standard. They are not compatible between each other. And depending on the issuer, you can have two different versions of the same asset. If Alice issues an Apple share in a tokenized version and someone else issues a tokenized version of the same share, you have two different assets and you cannot easily exchange them. So that's a problem. So now let's see a little bit the faction in that space. First one, the central banks. So the central banks actually are quite interested in blockchain. I've said they are the one publishing the most reports on DLTs, and they have a lot of geeks within them trying to experiment. So let's say you have an asset that on this public blockchain and you try to settle it. And one key issue that the central bank is responsible for is to provide you money in a secure manner that you can use to settle against that asset. So currently, the ECB is looking at 3 different options on how to do that. None of them implies a public blockchain directly. So the first one, which is to create a new blockchain on which you will transfer your assets from your public blockchain or another blockchain that will be provided by an infrastructure. And here, there will be the settlements, will be happening in this blockchain. That's the first version. The second one is to create an intermediary blockchain. It's proposed by Germany, where you will have there the exchange, the digital euro, and you will have a sort of API that connects with your blockchain, so you can have some sort of hash time lock contract and do this transaction. Another one a bit simpler, using a fast payment system, but with the same principle. So what is not considered so far is issuing directly this euro on the public blockchain, which would be the easiest way of doing all of this. So let's see all the actors. One is the central bank. The other one are financial infrastructures. Financial infrastructures, I'm talking about the CSDs, all the different actors that actually settle assets at the moment. They are the least interested in public blockchain because they currently have infrastructure they control. It's their business model to be this infrastructure. They are absolutely not interested. So they are doing tokenization projects, but in their own infrastructure, and probably adverse to this change. On the other side, we have the tokenizers, so the companies that are tokenizing assets and issuing them on-chain. You have a wide variety. Some are more or less rigorous in the way they establish this asset, especially on the legal side, how the asset you have is actually the asset that is claimed. On this, we have, I think in France, an interesting project, Spyco, that tokenize money market fund on-chain. And then what's also more interesting is they are addressing a specific market. So they are looking for treasurer of company, they look for yield, and so they give them this access to this tokenized MMF. So for people who don't know, MMF is just a type of investment product that's super safe, where you get a little bit of yield. So it's the staking of the traditional financial world. The networks that are competing for attracting assets and projects, and I think that has been discussed now, how many foundations have been super active in that domain, and probably Ethereum needs to do also its work. Stablecoins that, on the opposite, are looking to issue on every blockchain, and they don't care at all about the small wars of different religions. They just want to have their token as accessible as possible. And the banks that are currently a bit on the verge. Some are trying some experiment on public blockchain. In France, we have some examples. Because their business is selling to the customer activities, so they might find interest in using it in the longer run. So that's all this faction at war. In our movie, there is an alien entity that comes to Earth and see how we might misuse this technology and end up in a terrible situation. So they want to wipe out all of what we are doing on purpose. This is based on the actual movie. That's more or less the scenario. So what do we have as a solution? That brings us to the announcements from 2 days ago of Robinhood, on which we can remark the beautiful James Bond aesthetics. I think that's fantastic. Welcome to vintage. And they have been presenting the tokenization of assets with these really clear schematics showing all the process. Maybe if I can dive a little bit in a different dimension. He explained mostly the execution part, like as an individual, you can go to Robinhood and there is a chain reaction that allows you to get, in the end, the tokenized version of the assets. with an interesting approach of phases, of saying it's totally not tokenized initially, or at least you cannot use your token, but in the future you will have. I think we have heard that kind of melody before, so we need to be cautious, but apparently this is the plan. What risk are you taking when you're buying the tokens that are proposed by Robinhood? Higher risk. And this is not me saying it, it's the choice of Robinhood. In their official legal documentation, they have chosen to grade it as the highest risk possible when you're buying these assets. How that works, if we look a little bit closer. So you're a person or you're a robot in the future, maybe, anyone, and you want to buy a token. I will look now on the legal side, what's happening. So you buy this token. Actually, what you're buying is contracts. It's a derivative product that guarantee you that when you will sell it again, you will have the same value as the value of the share as it is quoted in the US. But you don't have any ownership on the share at all. This contract is between you and Robinhood in the European Union. So that's what you have. The token is a representation of this token, of this contract. And every time you exchange the token, what you're doing is exchanging the counterparty to this contract, and the contract evolves. On the other side, Robinhood in the EU has a link with Robinhood in the US, and they are the one that will actually buy the share on their side, put it in custody in the financial markets, and so on. What's interesting in the setup is how robust it is. Is it safe, do you think, to do this complex process? Actually, I find it quite safe because they are using, first, they are doing themselves a lot of the operation. Because if we look at other tokenized assets, and I've looked at many tokenized assets that have been done recently, a lot of them use similar processes. So the exact legal disposition can be a bit different. Some are using SPV in foreign countries, so like a special purpose vehicle. They create a company, the company owns the shares, and you have a share to the company, but the company, you have few recourse to get the share in the end. So the general idea is similar in many projects because you cannot issue directly on chain these shares because they have been issued by Apple in the US stock market, and that's where they are officially anyway. So you need to do this arrangement. But what's quite safe with Robinhood is, first, they do most of the chain, so they don't have too much counterparties. And second, they are regulated at every step. So in the US, they are regulated as a broker-dealer. So they have these. Between Robinhood US and Robinhood EU, I don't know the details, but I guess they have a contract. Then in the EU, they are a regulated institution also to be able to issue this derivative contract. And then they are also regulated to sell this token, especially in the second phase when they talk about exchanging on Bitstamp. Then they are, as Bitstamp, an exchange, MiCA compliant, and providing this service. So as you see, there is a quite protected chain between you and your asset, but definitely you have to bear in mind that you are not an owner of the final assets, and also that there is this long chain of risk, and also that even themselves they advertise it with saying it's a risky product. So how we end our movie? So in the movie I mentioned, it all goes better because the alien person discovers or libraries or music, and then they find it beautiful and everything stops. Okay. We might need to do a little bit more. And in my view, it might be a lot of coordination. We have all these actors I mentioned. They can cooperate sometimes, but they don't coordinate. And there is a lack of joint effort of trying to move on. One of the ideas that we need is to find a better spectrum to address different needs of the different actors in terms of compliance, in terms of risk. This is how financial ecosystem works. Like, not everything is perfectly regulated and clean, and it's a full spectrum. And I think in DeFi, for instance, we need to acknowledge that and try to find a broader spectrum of actors. One example I would give is how we make some compliance on the DeFi smart contract in a protocol, but the same applies also at the underlying blockchain, how much we want to have a spectrum of safety. One example is absolutely permissionless, so anything can do anything, and that's one way. Another level is blacklisting. You just forbid some address to do something that are illegal. whitelisting, which is the case, for instance, for Spyco, where you just select a number of clients, you KYC them once, and then they can do whatever they want as long as it's only with KYC people. And then you can even go further and authorize each transfer. At the moment you do the transaction, someone checks it's right. That's how the current financial system works. So if we manage for some transactions that are B2B, that are lesser risk, to use lower level of compliance, probably we save some energy. So in the end, potentially, we reach this beautiful world and alien doesn't destroy us, and that would be fantastic. And that's a park that's really nearby if you want to touch grass later in the week. Thank you for your attention, and we have 5 minutes for questions if you want.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the great talk. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, yes, very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
This is Vlad from iPor Labs. I just wanted to ask, do you think these tokenized stocks that Robinhood, that you just talked about, will be quickly available in custodial wallets, non-custodial, sorry, and then available in DeFi, for example? And from a legal perspective, how easy is to do that? If these tokens actually exists on the blockchain, they need to change owners and they need to be used, for example, as a collateral in DeFi, potentially. Do you see this happening quickly or happening at all?
So what I find first fascinating with that strategy is they know that they cannot change the world all at once. And what they are doing is applying all the rules as they can. As they explain, they have issued in this way initially, and potentially they hope that more and more we can rely on the blockchain part to do all the trade and the settlement of different transactions. And so I don't know their project, but it's very clear that it will take some time anyway to have the token. They explain that you can have it as a non-custodial pretty soon. That should be in months, but to be fully working in DeFi as we have, I don't think that's at all possible because they are compliant with all this regulation. They need to check who has this token, and even it's a contract, so they need to know the counterparty to their contract. So they cannot do that, but that's why I'm talking about coordination, and I think that's why the problem we have at the moment is we need different identity system, we need different compliance mechanisms that then we can slowly, like Robinhood is not going to do it themselves, but if there are slowly protocols that are recognized of having a safe way to allow transactions that are a bit more anonymous or a bit wider without breaking any sort of trust, maybe then we can hope that regulation change a little bit. But definitely that's not what they can do initially, and that would be super safe initially.
Thank you. Also, very good presentation. Just on that last point you were mentioning on the identity, so where do you see the current shortfalls, or better to ask, what do you think needs to be done to make that better?
So I'm not a specialist on the question of identity. I know in Europe there is a framework that's trying to be promoted of creating a digital identity. Currently it's not really linked with the efforts on chain, but there is the acknowledgement already that technologies like verifiable credentials are a good way to go. So yes, I think all the bricks have been identified, and there should be at some point a better, more cryptographic-based solution where you don't have to give all your identity to all the actors you're interacting with to guarantee safety. So, but it will take time. You need governments to provide you a safe way to identify you. You need to have a link with the chain of.
And sorry, just to follow up on that. So you're saying that the current issue is that they worry about the amount of information that you give away as a user?
No, I worry how much information I'm giving. Every time I interact with any platform, I have to give all my information for safety. I don't think it's a reasonable way to address these problems. No, from the perspective of regulators, I think it's more a question of slowness of evolving. Is currently the way to go is you ask everything, you ask your passport and so on. But it's also a question of the government providing what is called digital public infrastructure, so digital ID is not already the case in most European countries. So that's what's missing. Like if you have already an easy way to identify you, and then you can build on that to create secondary identities, that would be great.
Thanks. That's our time. If you want to take more questions outside, feel free to do so. Thanks, Xavier.
Thank you.